Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest rendition of Tales from Outer Space. Taken from the subreddit HFY. All the relevant links will be down below. And as always, I hope that you enjoy, and if you do, please consider supporting the channel. Now, on to the science fiction. Story number 1. We Only Need One, written by AC1308. Take it quiet now. I climb out of the all-terrain vehicle and wave my assistant forward. We don't want to spook them. These are literally the last 2 living specimens in existence. If they're a viable breeding pair, the Central Zoo will have to pay us whatever we ask of them. We only really need one, he muses. To sell to the zoo, I mean. I know this collector. His son was killed by one of these things. He'll pay 10 times whatever the zoo can just for one specimen. The male, for preferences. So he can torture it, or hunt it down and get it. I'm disgusted, and I don't bother hiding it. Or get it slowly, then cook it up and eat it. Absolutely. His voice indicates that he's got no problem with this. Big payday for both of us. Just saying. We only need one, after all. And what happens to the breeding pair aspect? I promised the zoo. I gestured to the negation. The female will only live so long, and when she dies, they're extinct, gone forever. I thought of that. He sounds very pleased with himself. I brought a cloning unit with us. We shove the male in there, get a read, and pop out an immature specimen. We can even fiddle with the genome a little so there's no genetic problems from inbreeding. Pity it doesn't work without a live specimen to start with, or it would have made myself a real fortune already. No, I state sharply. I will not assist you in your perverse scheme. We will be taking these both back to the zoo. Is that understood? He looks unhappy, but makes a gesture of assent. If you say so. I do say so. I lead the way to where the life sensor indicated. There are several flat rocks and pieces of wood piled up in a shelter, possibly at the entrance of a natural cave. They're in here. He makes a sardonic noise. Do you want me to go in there and get them out? No! I raise my voice and call out, repeating the sounds that I've been told mean come, food, safety, warmth. Nothing happens. Well, that was useful. He taps a bulging pouch in his belt. I can throw a stun bomb in there, and we can carry them out. No! I say forcefully. You might kill one. Suit yourself. He leans against a tree and makes a mocking noise as I repeat the noises, hoping that I'm getting them right. Over and over I repeat the sounds, varying in the tone. Surely they can hear me. Surely they can understand that I mean them no harm. And then I hear movement from within. I move back from the entrance to the shelter and crouch down to look less threatening. Slowly they emerge, large eyes blinking at the sunlight. Happiness surges through me as I identify one as a male and one as a female. We have a breeding pair. Moving carefully, I take out a sample of food that I know this species likes. They do look hungry, after all. Their eyes are drawn to it. Maybe this will be easier than I thought. What do we do now? I begin, but my assistant steps forward, a small but dangerous-looking pistol at his grip. What are you doing? Getting my payday, he says, and waves the pistol at the 2 specimens. Their eyes are now fixed on him, ignoring me and the food. Yeah, you know what this is, don't you? Well, behave, and I won't need to use it. You can't, I protest. I won't let you. His laugh is an ugly sound. Be glad I'm leaving you the female. I'll send another ship back to pick you up in a few days. Now turn around. I'm just going to secure you so you don't try anything stupid. I'm seething with rage by now, but he gestures with the pistol, and I turn. By now I have no doubt that he will kill me if I resist. I'm actually half expecting him to kill me anyway. Thus, when the 2 shots ring out, I jolt convulsively and nearly fall, thinking that I've been shot. but there's no pains. There's no wound. I look around, puzzled. My assistant, once loyal until seduced by greed, lies face down in the sun-heated rocks, and the two specimens, the two humans, are each holding a weapon of their own. Smoke curls lazily up from the barrels, which are aimed rock-steady at me. I gape, uncomprehending. Only warrior-caste humans are supposed to understand weapons. These are normal humans. All I've been able to find out about them is that they are barely capable of performing simple, menial tasks. And yet, they just killed my assistant and are pointing deadly weapons at me. Though my throat is dry with terror and confusion, I croak the sound associated with friend. Hopefully they won't murder me. "Oh, shut the frick up," says the female irritably, in my language. Accented to be sure, but I can still tell she knows what she's saying. "Tell me why I shouldn't kill you right now." At my feet, my assistant moves slightly. He's alive. The male moves forward fluidly, scooping up the dropped pistol. He kicks my assistant in the side of the head. My assistant stops moving. I mean you no harm," I stammer. I'm starting to realize that my understanding of the intellect was deeply flawed. Really? The female gestures with the pistol. "Go on. I'm here to retrieve you and take you to a place where you'll find safe and warm and well fed." I trail off to see if I've got their attention. "The Central Zoo," she spits out. "You want to lock us in cages in a frigging zoo." Not cages, I babble. "Safe, secure, comfortable places where you can live out your lives and maybe, breed. I mean, you're the last two specimens I know of, so, And whose fault's that?" she screams. "Your empire refused to accord the rights of a civilized species and attacked us at every opportunity. Your people seized our planets and drove us to extinction. You called us animals. I see now we may have been mistaken," I began. "Mistaken my ass," she says bitterly. "It was all a land grab. We had it, you wanted it. Simple as that. Cast us as mindless animals, and it's easy to mow us down, slaughter our civilians by the millions, and then move in and take over." "You know," the male says, "while they were coming over, I heard that one talking about cloning unit." He turns his attention to me. "You know how to use those?" "Well, yes," I say. "And the ship?" asks the female. "Can you fly it on your own?" "Yes," I say. "But why?" The male shoots my assistant in the back of the head. Blood and brains splatter over the rocks below. "Why did you do that?" The female grins darkly. "We've got all we need now to rebuild the human race, but we had two of you." The male nods. "And we only needed one." End of story. Story number 2. We Only Needed Two. Written by AC-1308. We had 17 worlds and 15 systems when we encountered the HFY, or the Empire of the Chosen, as they called themselves. The most prominent race in the Empire were the Planak, a warm-blooded reptilian species, apparently descended from the Surians. We didn't get to meet the rest, at least initially. The Planak were a stubborn people, with a high regard for numbers and odds, which led to a strong tendency towards caution. They had gained ascendancy over their fellow Empire members via bureaucratic practices and more than a few strong-arm tactics, making sure everyone towed the line and nobody did anything unwise, by which they meant anything that might threaten the well-being of the Empire of the Chosen or the ascendancy within. Exploration was carried out carefully, within the limits set and insisted on by the Planak. When we encountered the Empire, they had 12 worlds, all carefully chosen and scouted out over the thousands of years that they'd been roaming space. By comparison, we found our 17 worlds and terraformed them over the space of 4 centuries. Due to a misunderstanding in language translation back when we first encountered them, the Planak seemed to get the idea that our worlds had been ideal colony material when we found them. The idea of terraforming a planet in space over mere centuries was laughable to the point of insanity in their view. By the time we discovered the misapprehension, it was too late to correct. The first stones in the avalanche had begun to fall. We thought the planet were sending diplomats. They weren't. They were sending intelligence agents. This wouldn't have been so bad if they'd only seeking to find out if we had ill intentions towards them. But as we found out far too late, that wasn't the situation at all. They were, in the vernacular, casing the joint, traveling to each of our planets and then to Earth, observing the resources we had access to. All the wide open spaces we were gradually colonizing. Long story short, they were tallying up what we had so their masters could decide whether it was worth trying to take it from us. When they got back to the Empire space, they revealed their findings to their higher-ups within the planet chain of command. From what reports we've been able to glean, the response was outrage. How dare we, mere upstarts in space, have the luck to locate 17 planets, all suitable for life, and the gall to claim them all for ourselves. They didn't know then that we had poured centuries of blood, sweat, and lives into terraforming those planets, rather than just strolling up one day and finding them as is. Quite possibly, they never learned of their error. It's equally likely that they wouldn't have cared if they had known. Manufacturing outrage for one imagined slight is just as easy as for another. They hadn't told their fellow races about us when first contact had been made, and now they very carefully redacted the information that allowed through. We were a pre-sapient species, they claimed. Once they uplifted servants of the greater species that had created all the technology we used. According to the narrative, we had risen up and slaughtered our benevolent masters. Savage beasts of low intelligence but great cunning, we could not be trusted. The people of the Empire deserved the planets that we had stolen from our benefactors more than we did. All they had to do was come and take them from us. The planet ships entered our space, broadcasting signals that presaged a peaceful envoy. Then they attacked savagely, without warning or mercy. Entire colonies were wiped out within hours. The colonists of Mars died when the domes were blasted open and the power generators destroyed. In all too short a time, all the attacking ships were homing in on Earth. We did our best to fight, but we were thousands of years behind in tech, and they had gotten the jump on us. Some of them died. All of our ships were blown to scrap with no survivors, even those that tried to surrender. The planet made sure of that, scrambling our transmissions and rebroadcasting savage screams and roars of anger. They didn't bother trying to take Earth intact. Instead, they smashed every capital from orbit, then detonated neutron weapons in the atmosphere, murdering our innocent civilians by the millions, by the billions. We don't know what excuse the planet used to ensure that Earth was devoid of human life at the end, but the rest of the Empire went along with it. They had won, and the Empire of the Chosen now had 15 more planets to add to their roster, all outside the solar system. Ironically, they'd hammered Earth so badly as to make it uninhabitable, and Mars had never been terraformed, a conscious choice made by the first settlers there. Of the few humans extant in the galaxy at large, they were hunted down one by one for the private zoos of collectors or the fight other species in gladiatorial arenas. Neither one was conducive to long-range survival. I was on a ship that got off Earth just before the heavy bombardment started. Myself and Sergeant Graham Arcos were respectively the most senior and most junior of the security detail aboard. The idea was that we would ferry a bunch of politicians and high-ranking officers to a place of safety, from where they could start planning a military response to the massacre. It was a good idea, but an idea was all that it was. We barely made it 3 jumps away from Earth before we were spotted and attacked by a couple of planet ships. In the ensuing confusion, I was knocked unconscious. Sergeant Arcos cut off from the rest of the crew and passengers, and with the ship breaking up around us, threw me in an escape pod and jettisoned the both of us. We landed in what I later discovered to be one of our old colony worlds, but on a different continent to where the actual colony had been. My first act once regaining consciousness was to trigger the pod's self-destruct and move the hell out of the area. Then we laid low for the next few days. Then weeks. Then months. I'd more or less accepted that we were alone in this supremely hostile universe, gradually dragging out our existence on a planet that couldn't meet all of our nutritional needs, when a research ship landed. And in that moment, everything changed. Excerpt from the official memoir of Major Patricia Callahan, USMC. The Major had a plan, and I do mean that capital P. We left the mouthy assistant to the local wildlife and escorted our new alien friend back to our ship. She, I think it was a female, didn't take much in the way of persuasion to fly us off that rock, but she must have been thinking that we wanted to become pirates or something. The Major had bigger ideas. If we were going to not just survive, but show the Blankers just how massive a freaking mistake they made, we had to go big. For that, we needed two. 2 humans, 2 planets, and 200 years. The first planet we visited was Mars. Back in the home system, the Blankers and their toadies hadn't even kept up a presence here. Why should they? There was nothing there for anyone that couldn't get elsewhere more easily. They'd blown up the Tharsis and Hellas domes and smashed the Pavonis spaceport, but they hadn't actually done more than a cursory ground examination of the wreckage. Sure, they'd left no survivors, but in the vaults were complete gene storage banks for the terraforming that had never happened, and a computer system that had shut themselves down during the attack, containing the entirety of human knowledge and understanding. We landed on Mars, hooked up the ship to the temporary power supply, and rebuilt part of the dome so that we could live in it. Then we started studying the ship and the cloning bank, using the ship's own repair manuals to figure out how to understand it, take it apart, and put it back together. I was only ever mediocre at it, but the Major was driven. After a year on Mars, we'd reverse engineered the cloning bank and built another 9 of them. Then we started the clones in them. 5 men, 5 women. They were genetically improved, all distinct from one another, and they were designed to take no crap whatsoever. When our Blanca prisoner realized what we were doing, she tried to sabotage the cloning banks. The Major shot her right in the head, and I dumped her into the organic waste reclamation. Neither one of us lost a moment of sleep over it. Raising 10 kids from infancy wasn't easy for either of us. We taught them the arts and sciences, made sure that they weren't left in ignorance of anything important, but we raised them as warriors. When we figured that they were old enough, we took the ship and flew them to Earth. Another thing the Blankers hadn't taken into account was how fast old Mother Earth can recuperate from even a crippling injury. Only a very few plants and animals had survived, and none were thriving. But there was an ecology of sorts. We seeded more plants and animal species, speeding up the recovery process, while we set about establishing what we originally called the Mars-Earth Military Academy, but ended up just being called the Academy. Leaving the first 10 on Earth along with enough teleoperated machinery to rebuild a major metropolitan area, the Major and I returned to Mars and set about expanding our cloning operation. Back on Earth, the 10 also built cloning machines, as well as producing people the old-fashioned way. We're in this for the long haul now, but we'll see it through. I know I won't be here when we finally strike back, but the men and women who do it, every generation genetically improved for the last. Each and every one of you will carry on the memory of the Major and me. We only ever needed 2. Excerpt from the speech given by Sergeant Graham Arcos at the 50th anniversary of the inauguration of the Earth-Mars Military Academy. 200 years to the day after Earth was attacked and obliterated by hostile alien forces, a massive clock ticked over for the last time. The hour hand, made of blackened steel salvaged from the ruins of a long-dead city, had spent the last 2 centuries tracing year by year, drawing ever closer to this day. Every member of the new human race knew what it meant. They trained their whole lives towards this day after all. At sharply barked commands from their officers, they formed up in ranks, every uniform immaculately pressed. The soldiers themselves were lean, muscular, and deadlier than any living being had any right to be. For 200 years, they and their forebearers had been steeped in the knowledge that their destiny was to right a wrong and emblazon their vengeance across the stars. With that knowledge burning in the back of their minds, they had trained and practiced combat in every terrain available on Earth, as well as the surface of Mars and from ship to ship in orbit. Each and every one of them was a finely honed weapon, ready to return upon the planet that their compatriot races that had been done to them 200 years previously. They had ships by the tens of thousands, each derived from planet technology and advanced by human trial and error to a whole new level of capability. The crews of those ships had trained intensively against one another, trying every dirty trick in the book and coming up with a few new ones. Every man and woman, every soldier knew that the moment they announced their presence to the wider galaxy, they would be inviting retribution from every race out there. Every ship, every gun, every soldier would be turned against them. It would be a galaxy full of enemies. Or, to put it another way, they didn't have to worry about shooting friendlies. The first indication that something was wrong was when the planet colony started going dark, one after another. They simply ceased to communicate with the homeworlds and the empire of the Chosen. It wasn't until the 5th or 6th such blackout that someone connected them to the list of planets acquired in the last great expansion, some 200 years ago. But the significance still didn't register to anyone. Ships were sent to find out what was going on. They never reported back. Certain people within the planet military machine, whose job it was to worry about things like this, began to worry. There was a pattern building here, and they didn't like it. Orders were drafted for the Pride of Planet, their most formidable battleship, to set course for the next colony world on the list, and to take a full military escort along. There was much grumbling about the waste of resources, but the orders were carried out. Along with her escort, the Pride went to see what was going on. A week later, the Pride limped back into port with a single damaged corvette escorting her. Her battle screens were burnt out, her hull armor pitted and cratered so that she would no longer hold air, and half of her drives were slagged. The only reason that she had survived to get back was because her escort had taken the initial brunt of the ambush. They had recorded the ships that had done the attacking, recordings that made the blood run cold. Every line of attackers attested to their deadly purpose, and they'd repeated outperformed the ships sent against them, smashing them with a contemptuous ease. The worst thing was, nobody knew who they were. The Empire of the Chosen went on to full military standing. Every reservist was pulled back into active service. Conscription was announced and all leave was cancelled. Drums pounding and military music blaring on every news channel. They went out to throw back the invaders, or die trying. They died trying. When the last planet and affiliated fleet was destroyed, the ships appeared in the skies over the capitals of each of the worlds of the Empire. On all but one planet, they broadcast a single message in the language predominant on that planet. Surrender or die. The one planet was the throne world of the planet species, the seat of the Emperor himself. The ships that appeared there, after brushing aside the spirited, though ultimately doomed defense by the Imperial Guard, broadcast an even simpler message. We're back. Then they opened fire. The ships that left the orbit of the planet Homeworld did so without fanfare. Their progress seemed almost somber, as if they weren't quite sure what to do with themselves after 200 years of preparation. Behind them, the capital city was a crater. Every spaceport had been smashed to ruin. The planet Homeworld had suffered a loss that they could take generations to recover from. On their outward journey, they rejoined their fellow warships. Every world that they challenged had surrendered and promised no further aggression against humanity. This wouldn't hold, they knew. It never did, but they would be ready this time. No agreements would be made, no trade would be entered into. The planet and those who aligned with them would never be trusted again. Together, they set a course for home. Earth still needed rebuilding, and the future was yet to be seen. Perhaps one day the galaxy would be at peace, but that day had yet to come. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.